All right. And we are recording. All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here this evening. Relatively short notice. But I wanted to do this tonight in part because I have been getting a tremendous amount of feedback at the Executive Council, especially state Senate, state House level, from candidates in every corner of the state that are getting a lot of door-to-door feedback. And one of the most common questions I'm getting is some form of the following. When I get to the door and I ask the voter, what's on your mind? What are the things that worry you the most? What are you looking for answers about? Overwhelmingly, they're hearing economic related responses. And that can take on a number of forms. It can take on inflation. That could be groceries, housing, healthcare, heating fuel. I don't know about you guys. We finally turned on our heat last night. I think a lot of other people in New Hampshire are doing the same thing this week. And that is elevating the cost of heating your home very quickly as a front of mind issue. Price of gasoline for a lot of folks remains an important concern. And we can go right down the line. What is the answer to that? Is this what we should be expecting to hear? I think a lot of folks have been expecting, for example, to hear abortion or maybe environmental, LGBTQ plus issues, maybe Trump and his malfeasance, democracy, such issues as more of the front of mind of the voters when they hit the doors than they're actually hearing. It's overwhelmingly economic. That's what I keep hearing. And so I wanted to take a little bit of time tonight. This one won't be as long or as data driven as a lot of our other live streams, but to try to catch this, and this is recorded. We'll have it up on the YouTube channel probably later tonight. And I would invite you to share this information and to share your questions with me and with others that are on this call as well. But I want to, at the start, present a handful of slides that get at some very recent polling and trends that go back to the spring that I think will be really helpful in driving the rest of the conversation. So let me do that. Let's see here. Okay. Okay. And I'm going to do this. All right. So basically, I want to lay out a little bit about messaging in the final weeks for the reasons I just said a moment ago. What you're going to find now in your door-to-door, as the closer we get to election day, now we're under 3 weeks, you begin to find lower engagement voters about whom we're going to spend a lot of time the rest of the hour talking, who are going to start to be more engaged. The closer we get to election day, the lower the median level of engagement that will likely be willing to have a conversation. Hopefully that makes sense until you get to the final weekend when there's going to be a lot of relatively low engagement voters who both presidential candidates are desperately trying to get to come out, particularly Donald Trump, and that are finally going to be engaged even in your down ballot races. And this actually is a trend that we're seeing in recent years, but this is a really big deal. It's one of the main things that I hope folks will take from tonight. Highly engaged voters now lean towards Democrats, but less engaged voters are now, by fairly substantial margins, leaning towards the GOP. This was not always true. Those of you who've been around the block in politics for a while may appreciate this. For most of my lifetime, the thing that we've heard Democrats say is, hey, it is knock and drag, right? Get people that are relatively low engagement voters in presidential years, get them engaged to come on out, and don't worry about it. As long as they fit certain socioeconomic characteristics, often based on race, economics, and so forth, they will vote in such strong numbers for Democrats that if you take, for example, 10 Latino voters and you get them to the polls without knowing a lot about how they feel about politics, traditionally, you could count on roughly 7 of the 10 probably voting Democrat in most of the elections. And so even though 3 of the 10 in that example would be voting for a Republican, on balance, the knock and drag technique would be effective because you would be netting 4 votes in a 7-3. But this is not really true anymore, certainly not in the same ways. And so particularly with male voters that are relatively low engagement, it is now at a point where if you were to identify 10 and bring them out, even if they're non-white, you would find that at best it would be even, and that indeed Republicans might actually benefit from it, which means we have to think a little differently about strategy, who we're talking to, who we can count on to vote Democratic, and what kind of messages are causing more low engagement voters, including low engagement Democrats, to start looking at the Republican Party. These are the folks that could decide an awful lot of elections in New Hampshire, particularly down ballot, and definitely in the presidential race. These are the folks who could decide who wins the presidential race. Now, some of you may have seen me do this earlier. Back in June, I started presenting this information. Clearly, it's several months old now, but it was the beginning of trend lines that I thought were worthy of bringing out, and all the data, including more we'll show you in a minute, continue to show similar trends. So at this moment, Biden is still the candidate, but the trends directionally are very much the same today. The New York Times in May of 24 conducted a very high quality poll, and they basically split the electorate into 4 categories. High engagement voters, those who had voted in the last state primary, that's very high engagement. And then the second group, people that voted in the midterm election, but had not voted in the 2022 primary. So pretty engaged, but not the ultra engaged. Look what you see. In the super engaged, were even at this moment when Biden was beginning to struggle, was still with Biden by 5 points. In the second group, still pretty highly engaged, not quite as much. Biden was leading, but the lead was very small. The third group were people that had voted in the 2020 presidential election, but had not voted at all in 2022, neither their state primary nor the midterm general election. And you can see it, even at this point, Trump now takes the lead among this group by a couple of points. And then the final group, folks that had not voted in the 2020 presidential, but had told pollsters that they were considering voting in the 2024 presidential, you can see that even at this point, and this is before the debate that led to a chain of events that led to Biden dropping out, Trump already is dominating among the least engaged of voters who say that they might vote in the upcoming election. So look at that one more time. Highly engaged, up by 5. Pretty engaged, up by 1. Somewhat engaged, Trump by 2. Not really engaged, Trump by 14. There are a lot of people that are not engaged voters. And so that was an enormous red flashing light at a pretty early stage. Here's some of the information that's so important. Among these 4 groups, from most engaged to least engaged, they were asked, how do you view the economy? And you can see that, good or excellent. Highly engaged, 64% said good or excellent, and it drops to 34, 21, and then 16 among the lowest engaged voters. You can see it even starts dropping like a stone between the most and the somewhat engaged. They then asked, okay, what's your top issue? Here are the percentage of people in each of these 4 levels of engagement who said that either abortion or democracy was their top issue. And you can see that 42% of the super engaged said one or the other was the number 1 issue. And then it drops a lot to those that vote in the midterm, but not primaries. And then you can see for the folks that voted in the presidential, but not the midterm, or the ones that didn't even vote in the presidential, neither issue is getting a lot of resonance in this poll. Only 14% of voters in the lowest half of engagement said either abortion or democracy was their top issue. Before I get into that, one thing I want to note back in the economic, when you're at the doors and somebody says something about the economy is their number 1 issue, it's really important that we as candidates or volunteers uh, do not deny that their economic situation may be difficult or painful. A lot of what voters are looking for is connection. Do you feel what I feel? Or at a minimum, do you understand what I'm feeling? Do you understand my anxiety? Do you understand what it means to be worried about how to pay bills? That's a huge part of connecting with voters for obvious reasons. It's got to be authentic. But here's the other part. When you're talking to a voter about the economy, you want to talk about cost, but you don't want to do it in macroeconomic terms. Think about the most highly engaged voters. They tend to also be the most highly educated and have the highest income. They will, and they're disproportionately Democrats. And they will say, how can you say the economy is not doing all right? Look at the GDP. Look at the national unemployment rate. Look at the stock market. What do those things have in common? They're macroeconomic terms. They're descriptors that an economist might use. And obviously, that is not how most people think of whether or not their economy is working for them or not. If you ask folks in the bottom 3/4 here of the engagement, define the economy, they're much more likely to say, are groceries going up? Is gas affordable? What about the cost of housing? They're talking about eggs much more than they're talking about GDP. And I think that that's pretty easy to understand. So we need to speak the language when it comes to economics that most people are rightly using to determine whether the economy is good or excellent or fair or poor. Now, we talked about priorities here a second ago, what issues people are saying. It turns out several years ago, there is a woman at the University of Michigan named Yana Krupnikov. I've talked about her with some groups, who, before all of this stuff started, wrote a book about the polarization and disengagement as the key divide, that it's becoming about how engaged you are in politics and voting is the divide. And she sees that the divide is more and more about priority of issues than about the actual position you take on an issue. And so what I mean is they don't fit left, right. People in the upper right, think of the map of Americans as 4 quadrants: Democrat, Republican, high engagement, low engagement. High engagement Democrats will typically talk about the issues of abortion, the environment, LGBTQ plus, democracy, Trump's malfeasance. If they start going down the road with one, they're likely going to keep going down that road. What she finds is voters that are Democrats are still, whether high or low engagement, are still taking the positions of traditional partisanship. What's different is the issues that they find really, really important. What is different is what they think are the things that politics and government should be focusing on. So where we see involvement mattering is not in how you line up, but, she says, in what you think is important. She said, we found an almost enormous divide within Democrats on the extent to which inflation was important. Highly engaged Democrats said inflation was not that important, whereas lesser engaged Democrats put it right at the top of their issues, and that continues to be the case. She was writing this several years ago. This is a long-standing pattern. In fact, she said, what we found really surprising is that on a number of these issues, even when we re-interviewed people in the summer of 22, which was during the impeachment, the January 6 hearings, when democracy was the #1 issue, there was actually less division between uninvolved Democrats and Republicans than there was between high engagement Democrats and low engagement Democrats. So low engagement Democrats prioritize cost, inflation, the economy, housing, and immigration, which they disproportionately see as an economic issue. Economy, cost, economy. And that's true whether you're a Republican or a low engagement Democrat, which is part of the reason why Trump does so well right now with lower engagement Democrats, because what he is prioritizing looks a lot more like what they are prioritizing than what high engagement Democrats are prioritizing. I hope that makes sense. Before we get more into that, and I want to show you some more recent stuff, just to reiterate, if anybody has any questions before we go into some very recent data that I think is really instructive for where to go, feel free to ask. I think hopefully the chat function is available here, and feel free to ask some questions, and I'll try to chip away at them here as we go along. But otherwise, I am going to share again, because I think some of the more recent polling, even as recent as this past weekend, is really instructive. So here is a September poll that is very instructive, that asks different kinds of voters. Are you hardcore Trump? Are you hardcore Harris? Or are you a swing voter? Are you unsure or simply leaning towards one or the other? Look at where the priorities are. The most important issue to you, this was a national one. You could see for Trump voters, over a third said inflation was and prices, cost was the most important issue. Among Democratic hardcore, it was only 13%. Look at the swing voters. The swing voters, the people that will decide the election, which is lower engagement voters right now, look much more like a Trump loyalist on prioritizing inflation than a Harris loyalist. I think when you're knocking on the doors, if you're knocking on the doors of the people that you're trying to persuade, this is not going to be unusual. You're going to see a lot of this. Look at number 2, jobs and the economy, obviously closely related. Very similar to the Trump and more than the Harris. Then we go down. Immigration is the third highest among swing voters. Obviously, for Trump loyalists, it's their second biggest issue. So again, it roughly speaking aligns more with the Trump than the Harris. When we get to healthcare, that's the first issue where we see swing voters more interested, more aligned with Harris than Trump. I would argue that's a little misleading, because when they're talking about healthcare, they're probably talking about what? The cost of healthcare. Again, they look at immigration as a jobs issue. Who are the people that are taking my jobs? Who are the people that are taking my housing? This is what the Trump Vance ticket talks a lot about. They are attaching immigration in a very different way from 2016 or 2020 to jacking up the cost of housing and taking away people's jobs, much more than a more explicit, ethnographic description. Then we get down to taxes. And finally, when you look at swing voters, look where we get down on their priorities. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Number 6, environment. That is the much better alignment with Democrats. Abortion is number 7 on their list. And then it goes civil rights. You can see and then very few Americans are frankly very worried about national security at the moment. But look at the prioritization. I would argue the top 5 priorities of swing voters are economic, directly or indirectly, cost and economy. And then the suite of issues that high engagement Democrats are most interested in, climate, abortion, civil rights, and so forth, are actually near the bottom of the list for the kind of voters who will likely decide who wins the election. So abortion and climate and civil rights are very motivating for people who are hardcore Democrats and you just want to make sure they're coming out. This is what is getting them out the door. But for the other voters, soft Republican, low engagement Democrat, true swing voters, the small percentage that are truly in the middle, their priorities cannot be clearer, as this recent polling shows. Now let's look at this one. I got this 2 days ago from the Silver Bulletin, which is Nate Silver's Substack. So I want to give him credit for that. He dug this out among the New York Times poll over the weekend of who are the actual undecided and probable but not definite voters. So undecided are the people that say they're likely to vote, but they don't know for whom. It's a small group, but they're very important. And then the right side are people that are probably voting, but not definitely voting. So these would be people sort of on the bottom half of the engagement scale. Look at who they are. Like, I mean, quite literally, who are we talking about here? Well, we're talking about Younger voters, look at that, 18 to 29-year-old. 25% of 18 to 29-year-olds in this key poll that came out over the weekend, New York Times poll, said they are probably voting, but not definitely. Compare that to Gen X, 45 to 64, and the boomers, much smaller percentages. Look at white versus non-white. That's not quite as big an issue in New Hampshire. We remain a very white state as other places like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia, Arizona, Nevada. But you can see non-white voters, much bigger percentage, and bigger percentage that are undecided but plan on voting. And then look at independent voters. This should not be a big surprise. Higher percentage that are genuinely undecided, and a much higher percentage that are not sure if they're going to vote at all. Remember, keep in mind, the swing voters, the ones that are undecided, the ones that are up for grabs, disproportionately the ones that are lower engagement, look what their priorities are and look who they are. So a lot of people might say, well, look at that young voter, 18 to 29, 25% say I may or may not vote. Probably not definitely. Well, that must be because of certain issues, like, for example, how they feel about the Israel-Palestinian, the war in the Middle East. Except for the data show that's probably not true. This spring, Harvard Institute of Politics did their annual youth poll. It's generally considered to be the gold standard of polling among young voters between 18 and 29. This spring, they were asked they were asked, I'm going to give you two issues. Which is more important to you? Almost like when you get an eye exam and they ask which is clearer, the left or the right, and they keep giving you choices until they get the correct prescription. This is what they did here. And when they stacked it all up, when they were done the exercise, look at the results among all 18 to 29-year-old voters. What were the highest issues that were most consistently said, most important? Number one, inflation. Number two, healthcare. Then housing. Gun violence, that's a bit of an outlier, but obviously critically important for younger voters. Then jobs. I mean, look how far you have to go down to start getting to democracy, reproductive rights, keep going down, climate change. Look where Israel-Palestine is. Look where student debt is. So we have to make sure we separate what high engagement Democrats, the people most likely to show up, the people most likely to write a letter to the editor, the ones most likely to tweet or post on Facebook, the ones most likely to show up at your local committee meeting, the ones most likely to be on this live stream tonight, and compare that to what all 18 to 29-year-olders are saying. So even among younger voters, who in theory, on some of these issues you think might not be quite as sensitive on some elements of economic and cost, not the case. And then you can see the breakdown by gender, where there are some important differences. Probably the most obvious one is reproductive rights, where 58% of women in the age group said it was very important. You can see that would have put it among women in the top, it would have been fourth, I believe. But among men, it would have been near the bottom. That's something to think about in your targeting, when you communicate. A lot of these are the young adult children of the people you know, right? Anybody here who is, say, late 40s or older, and let's be honest, that's most people that are highly engaged at this level in the party. If you have kids, there's a good chance your kids are in this cohort. Mine are. My kids are 19 and 21. They talk about cost a lot. As they approach the end of college, they think about how hard it's going to be to get housing. They think about healthcare down the line. Like, they're starting to think about these things. They notice the cost of things. And this comes up very often. It's not that they're not really concerned about a lot of these issues on the list, but the prioritization is the key. So whether you're looking at age group, whether it's the engagement level among, again, you can see younger voters that are less likely to be definitely voting are just the same as millennial, Gen X, and boomers in the priorities among lower engagement voters. So that may be counterintuitive to a lot of folks, but that's what we're finding in the data, and it is just rampant across the way. So I want to stop there in terms of some data. Obviously, I could show you this stuff all day, and I can assure you this is occurring. I talked to people just today. I talked to people in Sullivan County, Hillsborough County, Rocky, across the state today. And I'm consistently hearing similar messaging. And so one thing I would say to all of you is, when you get asked about eggs or groceries, let's be honest. You as a state rep, you as a state senator or executive counselor, you directly, unless you plan on bringing tens of thousands of chickens to your personal property, are unlikely to be able to drive down the cost of eggs unilaterally. These are macro issues, and for the most part. And you need to be honest. And I think you can say, look, a lot of my Republican opponents here, especially the incumbents, are going to promise you the moon. They're going to promise you stuff that they can't do and that they haven't done. And I'm not going to do that. I'm authentic about this. But I'll tell you what I can do. I can do something about your local property taxes. I can be part of the solution to stop slopping down unfunded mandates to the bottom of to the town level, jacking up your property taxes because we keep pushing it down and making things more expensive because we do it at the local level. If we can keep more money in your pocket by putting a lid on property tax increases, by being responsible at the state level, while others are working on lowering costs, and I will be your advocate to let them know how upset we are about costs, I can work on lowering your taxes, keeping more of your property tax money in your pocket that will help you deal with the cost that I understand, that I connect are really painful for you right now. Let's focus on what we can do. We're going to do whatever we can on cost. When it comes to groceries, we're going to do what we can to make sure that we don't see price gouging in the grocery sector. We're going to do what we can to find efficiencies, including collaboration with county and local government. But we're going to put money in your pocket, and we're going to fight for that, and we can do something about that. And then obviously, when we get the majority, we've got to deliver. So I'm going to stop there, and let me see if there are any questions folks have, and you could either raise your hand or oh, I think I see somebody here. There we go. All right, Joseph. All right, I see your hand up. If you want to go ahead, maybe unmute, and let's hear it. Oh, I'm not sure I can hear you. Let's see here. All right, Joseph, I think you had a question?
No, I didn't know my hand was up. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, that's okay. That's all right. I mean, those of you that are candidates or are working with candidates, is this consistent with what you're hearing on the doors?
Well,
Yeah, Katie.
This is me. I'm sorry.
Oh,
go ahead, Katie. Go ahead.
Katie.
I was going to say it's very consistent with what I'm hearing back. My house is a staging location for canvassers, and I also drive some of our Bedford State rep candidates around, and it very much echoes what I'm hearing, which is in contrast to what I'm hearing from other people who keep pushing the reproductive health message, and which are important issues, but that's not what conversations at the door are about. And I wish we could provide talking points to candidates and canvassers to counter these messages, and how, it's not Democrats' fault that you know, your grocery bill is high, or your electric bill is high, or the latest one I'm seeing because of the time of year, you mentioned like heating, we're gonna start seeing concerns about that. The other one I'm starting to see a lot on social media is concerns about increased property taxes, as in a lot of communities, whether it's Portsmouth or Bedford, we're seeing a shift where residential homeowners are picking up a larger percentage of the property bill, and commercial and apartment projects are actually seeing property tax declines. And a lot on social media, people are trying to tie that to Democrats, which, you know, just isn't true. But you know, I guess what I'm trying to voice is, how do we get canvassers and candidates to be able to message about that at the doors, you know?
Well, I think there are a few things, you know, as I speak with leadership at the party and the House and Senate level, as well as incumbents who are leaders in their own right, obviously. I think that there are enough people that are hearing this frequently enough that you're beginning to see subtle adjustments in messaging. For example, I believe it was yesterday morning, Amplify NH, which is a Democratic supporting group, began running a digital ad. They said they're going to put, I think, $300,000 into it. That is a 30-second ad and focuses on a handful of issues that are generally economic in nature. It is interesting that the first several statements in the 30-second ad are economic, cost, inflation, dealing with property taxes. And then after those, the fourth one, if my memory is correct, is a visual of a woman in a hospital gown sitting on clearly waiting for the doctor to enter the room for the appointment. And it talks about personal freedom. It doesn't actually use the word abortion, though obviously the visual and the term personal freedom can connote that. But to me, if I were to look back 6 months ago, 9 months ago, it is much more likely that both that specific issue as well as the language used would have been higher up and more direct. And so I do think that look at where the candidates are. Look at the fact that Kamala Harris is trying to finalize going on Joe Rogan's podcast, which is an enormous platform, and one that, you know, 6 weeks ago, Vice President Harris was not doing even some relatively conventional media sources. And Rogan would be wildly in the opposite direction from most of the appearances she was making. This is not because she is bored. It is because she and Democrats and Republicans are recognizing the kind of voters who are probably going to decide this election and the kind of issues that they're worried about. And so I think it's okay to have these conversations now. It's part of the reason I want to do this tonight. And I think all of you, when you are talking to your candidates or your cohorts, is share your experiences about what is successfully working for you on economic messages. Cost is never the wrong place to deal with it. Dealing with property taxes, never the wrong way to go. People are upset about cost. They're upset about property taxes. And we have to play offense on that, because I'm telling you, the Republicans are trying to play offense on it right now. Walter, I think you had your hand up a moment ago.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's pretty interesting what you said. I think that when we did some conversation canvassing earlier in the year, when people asked them what they were concerned about, educational funding was a big thing. Because in a lot of these areas like Rochester and Summers, where there are people with young families are moving into school, and they're concerned about this, the future of public schools. So that was an issue. And the other comment I had was that you mentioned that the enthusiasm for the Harris campaign seems to be driving enthusiasm. She seems to be the one enunciating a plan to deal with the cost of goods and services. And yet Trump doesn't seem to be saying anything about it. anything substantive way, is his silence and the fact that she's coming out in light of this new wave of enthusiasm, is that going to help our candidates?
Clearly, enthusiasm for the presidential candidate, in this case Harris, has the effect of helping bring out lower engagement voters, presumably in this case to vote for Harris. And I think the thing for us that are thinking about down ballot, when people are coming out because of increased enthusiasm for, in this case, Harris, we cannot assume that they will vote Democratic all the way down. Now, because they're not being driven out by down ballot candidates, and frankly, because they're generally lower engagement voters, or else they would already be coming out. They wouldn't need additional motivation. Then they know very little, almost certainly nothing, about executive council and state senate and state house candidates. Now, I want to be clear. That does not mean that they will leave it blank. I think that there's been a bit of a misconception over the years that we want people that come out, say for Harris, to vote blue all the way through, because otherwise they will leave it blank. And then, you know, obviously that might cost us elections. But the data show that's not actually true. Generally speaking, about 98% of people in a presidential year that show up will vote for president, and then governor, and then Senate, although we don't have a race this year, and then Congress. There's a little bit of a dip for executive council because they have no idea what it is, but it's not like a 10-point dip. It's like a 3-point dip. It goes down to like 94, 95. But then it goes back up above 95% for state senate. And here's the real ringer. Even at state rep, in districts that are 1-seat districts, it remains within 1 percentage point typically of the presidential participation rates. So if 98% of the people in, you know, in a ward in Rochester are voting in the presidential race that show up, 96.5, 97%, maybe more, will vote in a single seat, like Chuck is in a single seat state rep district. So his participation rates are going to be really surprisingly close to the same as governor and president. But for the multi-seat districts, and you know, Katie spoke a moment ago, Katie in Bedford has a large multi-seat district, and whether it's a 2-seat district or a much larger district, the patterns are the same. They don't keep getting worse as the district gets bigger. People don't know a lot of the candidates. A lot of them are uncomfortable with the concept that you vote for no more than 5. That's very weird and exotic to most low engagement voters. So they don't want to spoil their top of the ballot because they feel they may have misunderstood what the assignment was at the bottom of the ballot, when frankly, they didn't know 5 candidates probably. And they, yeah, right. So they didn't come out for that. So we see a lot of blanks, undervotes within the multi-seat state rep. And you typically see an 8 to 10-point drop in participation in multi-seat house districts. So the good news is the problem is not primarily that these low engagement Democrats coming out for Harris show up, vote for Harris, and get the hell out. That's not what's happening. But here's what is happening. As they go down the ballot, they're going to vote, except that multi-seat one problem I mentioned. But it's not clear that they're going to obviously vote for Democrats all the way down. And I could give a slew of examples of very conservative Republicans getting votes that very obviously came from people that also voted for people like Annie Custer and Maggie Hassan in 2022, because the participation rates remained almost at 100% and 98%. And yet you would see in even in blue towns, you would see many voters that clearly were voting for hardcore pro-life, Second Amendment absolutist type, free state type, and Annie Custer. And clearly that's not their ideology. It's because they didn't know who was running for state rep, and all they had to go by in the absence of information about the state rep candidates was what they knew about the governor's race. In 2022, they knew Chris Sununu was 63% approval rating, relatively moderate, nominally pro-choice, right? That was his brand. And they're like, oh, I guess the state rep Republican's probably the same. That's cool. And if they didn't know Tom Sherman, and a lot of them just didn't know much about Tom, and they didn't know the Democratic state rep candidate, that meant that they knew nothing about Dem governor, Dem rep, Republican rep. So what drives decision making? The one piece of information they did feel they were comfortable with, Republican governor. This fall, we don't have Chris Sununu. Kelly Ayotte's name ID is very close to 100% because she's a former senator, and Lord knows both candidates are getting millions of dollars a week in ads. Joyce's name ID is catching up, but probably my number one message that if I had a magic wand, I would want all the DGA money and other money to support Joyce's campaign. I wish there was more of it that was an affirmative branding of what Joyce will do as governor, a higher percentage of the mix, because if we can get the level of comfort of low engagement voters with both Kelly and Joyce to be approximately the same, then we lower the risk of losing votes from low engagement Democrats who, when they get to the bottom of the ballot, feel that they don't know much about Joyce, they do know something about Kelly, and in the absence of information about the rep candidates, will give Kelly some additional votes. Sort of a lower intensity version of what Sununu has enjoyed over much of the last 6 years. That is one of my chief concerns, and that's one of the things that, at least to the extent I can publicly advocate, I would advocate for more positive branding at the doors and on the airwaves about Joyce and what she has done as mayor. Let's play offense on that. And then let's play offense about what Joyce will do as governor, because that's part of the branding that'll help us down ballot. Let's see. Oh, got some hands. Let me go to Jill next, and then I'll go back to Katie.
Hi, Steve.
Hey, Jill.
Something that I'm aware specifically of an issue where I think there are federal funds that came to promote homeowners to convert to heat pumps, mini splits in their houses. And I gathered that some of that the funding has been jammed up for a couple years. My landlord is someone who wants to do it, and whoever's got control of it, probably some Republican committee somewhere, is not setting the standards and releasing the money. And what this points out is that if you want the policies at the top, I mean, this is money that Jeannie and Mag sent to us. And it's not getting down to New Hampshire residents because the Republicans hate taking federal money and even less distributing it. So I think one of the big arguments for vote for blue all the way down is that those reps, those state senators and the executive council people are the ones who are going to be okaying and releasing those funds and making sure it gets where it's supposed to go. So that I feel is like a strong argument for why you vote all the way down the ticket, in the same colors you vote for at the top. That's my point.
Well, I like that. And I think the skill that is required in something like that is, I think there are a lot of specific examples that if they can be connected at a door or theoretically in a mail piece in a succinct way directly to a cost, that then you've got yourself a winning talking point. And so the way you described it, Jill, I think that there is a way, an example like that. And again, some of it is you have to explore what the voter is really worried about, right? We're trying to address whatever their anxiety is. It's the fastest way to earn support. And if they are bring up something in a way that allows for, there are actually options on the table that could help solve your problem and end up saving you a lot of money. And by the way, it's good for the environment. But the problem is the current Republican leadership, my state rep, that I'm trying to defeat here, they are an impediment to freeing up money that's already been approved and that folks like you could then tap into, and you'd start saving yourself some money in the long run. And it'd actually be the right thing for the environment, which is pretty cool. So we got to unlock that money that's already sitting there. This is not raising new taxes or lobbying for new money. This is something that's sitting on the deck. We just, I got the key to unlock it. You get me in the majority, you vote for me. We got the key to unlock it and increase funds to help make your life a little bit better and a little bit cheaper. And I think you can do that in a way that folks go, this is a person of action. This is a specific action I can do to make progress. And this person gets that I'm looking to lower cost. I think. Katie, you had your hand up.
Yeah, a few minutes ago, you said something about like, focusing on Joyce Craig and keeping the messaging positive. And I just want to comment on that. And, I think you're spot on in that, in my opinion. I've gotten a lot of phone calls from different people from Bedford or across Hillsborough County in the past couple of weeks as the Republicans put out all these signs that are borderline silly, and they're, the old, so-and-so equals income tax thing. And we're seeing all these little signs comparing Biden to Hillary, like little issue-based signs. And there seems to be like people are starting to get like anxious about it, and people wanting to do like put out our own signs. And what I'm trying to tell people, and I'm curious as to hear your viewpoint on this, is like I'm really not into the tit for tat stuff. I really think that voters are so sick of the negativity. I just put an ad that came up against Matt McLaughlin, who's running for state senate. Very key district. And it, like, look at it. I mean, they put a little snorkel in his mouth. It's just like so childish. And I can't help but think that doing a tit for tat, playing that game is a losing strategy. And I would just like to hear your thoughts on that, because I think that, the average voter just is sick of all this negativity and just wants to hear about values and whatnot and positivity. And that's, anyways, I'm rambling, but go ahead.
Well, a couple things. First of all, that exact, folks can see it in the chat. I've been spending a lot of time with Senate candidates over the last few days, and I spent time this morning with Matt. I spent time with Ben Ming's campaign this afternoon. I was up in Sugar Hill working with Rusty in District 1 yesterday, and Stu on Monday. So I've been really focused in some of my work on state Senate candidates. Stu had this exact mailer hit doors with basically the only difference being it's his face, his name. It's the same thing. And so I'm also seeing the negative ads, right? All the mailers that all of these Senate candidates are getting now. And because I'm going around the state, you can see the patterns. And the Republicans are focused like a laser on money, 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 cost, cost, cost. And you can see tax, tax, tax. And it is silly. I personally don't think this one is a particularly effective one. I've seen some other ones that I think have a potential to be more effective. And I will say some of the stuff against Joyce, because we get that mail. We have undeclared voters, we got Democrats, so we get it all. And the stuff with Joyce toggles between silly and, in my opinion, if it was a male Republican gubernatorial candidate, running, it would feel borderline misogynistic at times, trying to distort Joyce's appearance in ways to try to make it about, in really inappropriate ways. So that stuff's nasty. And I think that the money has been spent on Kelly to such an extent, defining her in a negative way. And look at the polling. She is underwater. Her net is underwater. Her negatives are higher than her favorables. In 2016, when she lost by 1,000 votes to Maggie Hassan for Senate, she had an over 15% net favorable rating. People didn't vote against Kelly because they didn't like her. They liked Maggie. Maggie and Kelly were two popular statewide figures in what was effectively a tie, with a third-party guy, Aaron Day, running specifically as she's a rhino, vote for the real Republican, and he got 3% of the vote, and that was the ballgame. This is different. Kelly's negatives are 15 to 20 points higher than they were in 2016. the DGA, Joyce, Cindy, when she was running, everybody has done the job of bringing up Kelly's negatives. So now, to your point, Katie, we now need to fill in. We're asking people in effect to fire Kelly because Kelly is like, hey, I'm the incumbent. I'm the fifth term of Sununu. I'm the one that you've heard of. I'm the one that you liked. Look at me. And we're like, nope, fire her, even though she's not the incumbent. I think that we have successfully gotten to the point where more than 50% of the population is willing to fire her. The question is, will 51% of the population decide they want to hire Joyce? And I think that is where I'm getting at with the space has been created. The job has been done. Now let's see if people are willing to hire Joyce for the job. And that's going to require positive messaging to maximize people realizing, Manchester was not violent crime went down 40% during the time that Joyce was mayor of Manchester. Thousands of jobs were created during the time Joyce was mayor of Manchester. Thousands of housing units were created over the time that Joyce was mayor of Manchester. Being mayor of Manchester is arguably the most comparable job to being governor. It's a strong mayor form of government. It's the biggest city in the state. It's the most diverse city in the state. It's the most complicated city to work in the state. And Joyce did that job for several terms with the results that I just described. That is the closest thing to being governor, far more than being an attorney general and a U.S. senator. I think there's a positive case to make, and I think we need to make it more vigorously because now people are going to decide, I'm ready to fire Kelly. Am I ready to hire Joyce? Chuck, I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, I did, Steve. And one of the questions I had is that I noticed one of the Kelly ads that she's had out there is that Joyce is going to raise your taxes by $160 million, when in actuality, it's the $160 million that the Republicans just took out of the state budget with the I&D tax. And how can we, I've been thinking about ways to address that when people talk to me, Joyce Craig's going to raise our taxes. One of the thoughts is asking them, well, how did that $160 million work out for you? Did you get it? Because it's only gone to the upper income, and a lot of people don't understand that. How do you think we should message that?
Look, I've been around, I've been doing this stuff for 20 something years in New Hampshire politics.
One of my, beat, Steve.
You know what? You do. And good point. And one of the things that I aspire to help change is the defensive posture that Democrats have been put into on the issue of taxes since the days of Mel Thompson. And if you start in a defensive position, voters believe if you sound defensive, then a lot of voters go, you must have something to be defensive about. And so you begin in a defensive position. I mean, here's what I would like to say. Look, in the last 2 years, have your taxes gone down? No, most New Hampshireites' property taxes have gone up. And I think, as Katie was saying earlier, in certain communities, they have gone up dramatically. Now, are they going up dramatically? Like, is it because of all of the wild-eyed spending of selectmen and school board members? Those are the folks closest to the ground. That is generally not what's going on. What's going on is we're slopping down costs that in every other friggin' state in the country would be getting paid at the state level. And by the way, more efficiently because you'd have scale, but we don't do that. We have the most inefficient run government in the country because when you push down the taxes to the local level, you're having every town is creating everything from scratch when every other state in the country, including Wyoming and Alabama and everybody else, figured out over 100 years ago, that's an incredible way to jack up property taxes and eventually degrade the quality of the services that you're getting for that money. And I think that we have a very positive play offense kind of message that says, they say your taxes, Joyce wants to raise your taxes. So let's talk about it. Have your taxes gone up or down in the last 2 years? They have gone up. So if we're gonna blame Joyce for something that she's not even in office to do and hasn't done, then let's talk about what the people that were in office did to stuff that actually did happen. And your taxes are going up right now. And this 160 million, whose taxes? Whose taxes? It's a very small group of people whose taxes they're not even going to be going up. They would simply be going back to what they were before. And most of them weren't complaining about it.
Right.
That's the point. Like, we got to play offense and say, whose taxes are going up and whose taxes have been going up. If your taxes have been going up the last few years, it's time for a change. We just got to play a lot more offense. Katie.
On the property tax issue, I think it's also like, to some extent, no side's fault other than like the changing landscape of property values. And the timing really sucks for us. Or anybody, because they blame Democrats for rising taxes. So whether it's Bedford or Portsmouth or other locations where you have a higher commercial tax base as a percentage of the overall tax base, you know, we've seen huge rises in property, in home values in New Hampshire. You know, Portsmouth, surprised very much so, and in the Manchester area as well. Commercial property, because of the pandemic and the impacts on that, you know, people working remotely, things like that, we are not seeing the same increase. And therefore, residential property is being valued at a much higher rate than commercial property. You know, in Bedford, we went up as much as 33% on residential property. Commercial property went up 4%. Apartments, guess what? There's no apartment buildings that ever go for sale. So the appraisers just kind of pull a number out of their butt, and they marked it at like 14% for Bedford. Nothing's been for sale. All we know is that rents keep going up. So there's no way in my mind that 14% is accurate. But when the average is going up more than 14% and more than 4%, they got tax cuts out of this, you know? Well, homeowners saw their taxes increase 30%. So that, you know, I just want to explain that because that's separate. And I think we need to know how to explain it to people when they complain about their property taxes going up and try to blame Democrats, that it's just a market valuation thing, but the timing really sucks.
It
That
does
makes
suck.
sense.
And I'll say this, it goes back a little bit to what we were saying a moment ago about property taxes. When you have a reval, and because residential real estate values have generally been going up a lot faster than commercial, you know, Class A office space, retail, and so forth. And single family structures have been going up faster than condominiums. I mean, if you are a single detached single family homeowner, the good news is your most valuable asset is exploding in value. The bad news is, in the meantime, you got to figure out how to be liquid when the asset itself is, you know, in theory, I suppose you get a home equity loan. This is not attractive. This is not a good answer. People are not looking to do reverse mortgages as a way to deal with the downshifting of costs. And honestly, the only options you have for a lot of folks are either a home equity loan, and of course, interest rates, while going down, are not as low as they used to be. So that has a cost, or a reverse mortgage, which is very unattractive for most people. Those are crutches. Those aren't really solutions. They're ways to deal with a system that is bizarre relative to any state in the country. The more we rely on downshifting costs to the local level, the more that changes in real estate values and changes in the relationship between residential and non-residential, the more dramatic the impacts are going to be for voters, for residents, for voters. So when folks go, man, my home, good news, my home is exploding in value. Bad news, my property taxes didn't go up by, 4% like the budget did. They're going up by 13% because my home is a little bit bigger piece of the complete tax property tax pie. You got to say, look, it's just another reason why we have to get away from the downshifting of cost. And you keep going back to this. Hey, voter, I want to leave you with this thought. The last 2 years, did your taxes go up or did your taxes go down? And most people are going to say, my taxes went up and they're going up more. And you're like, who's been in charge? Republican governor, Republican House, Republican Senate, Republican Executive Council. They're the ones pushing down the cost so they can look like superstars at the state budget level. But they keep pretending that local property taxes somehow don't count as taxes. I don't know about you. Is the money green when you send it to the town hall? Is it the same looking money as the money you send at the federal or state level when you buy a meal and pay rooms and meals tax, or when you pay your federal income? It's the same money. I don't know why they think it's somehow different money, less painful money. It's the same money. And it's time that we get honest about that, because they're trying to take credit for lowering state taxes when all they're really doing is disproportionately increasing your taxes even more. And just play offense on that. Are your taxes going up or down? Keep getting them to think about that. Because we're not in the majority right now. We don't have the governor's seat. It's time for change. People want change. I see a question here from Matthew Damaris. Full disclosure, I teach a grad course at UNH on campaigns, public policy 812 at the Carsey School. Matthew's one of my students, a great student, and really inquisitive about all this. So it's a delight to see him on this tonight. I appreciate that. And he had a couple of questions in the chat. One is, do you think the indictment of a Sununu appointed Supreme Court justice, I don't know if people saw that today, 7 counts, 5, I believe 2 felony, 5 misdemeanor charges. It seems, according to Matthew, seems like it could be completely ignored by voters. But considering that Sununu is mentioned in the indictment, the justice in question, Marconi, this allegedly approached Governor Sununu and in effect asked if there's anything he could do to help put roadblocks in an investigation involving Justice Marconi's husband, who is the long-standing commissioner of the Port Authority over in Portsmouth, which is part of the Peace Development Authority. There's no accusations made about Sununu, and I'm not suggesting that, but he is a key witness, because that, if it is true, that alone is one of the charges. Going to the governor and asking him to slow something down or stop something like that is illegal. And we don't know. The answer is obviously, we don't know. It's 3 weeks before the election. It is potentially explosive. The wheels of justice tend to be slow. So it's not clear. And frankly, in a bigger picture thing, and in a diminished media environment, there are, compared to a generation ago, there are really only a handful of outlets that have both the staff to be able to cover a story well and the platform to get a critical mass of eyeballs to see it. And MUR would clearly be one of them. To a lesser extent, New Hampshire Public Radio, although they've diminished it to some extent in their platform. Most of the daily newspapers, including the Union Leader, National Telegraph, the Portsmouth Herald, which this one could actually be quite interesting in the Seacoast-based papers because of the nature of the Port Authority being a central feature of the story. The Concord Monitor has been a fantastic paper forever. They are suffering like all papers. That's going to be the trick. Is there enough of a megaphone for any story to get that kind of traction? Or does this become sort of a sexy enough story that Boston media decides to pick up on it? The Boston Globe, some of the TV. We're going to know this in the days to come. It is a significant story, and we'll see if we're going to know enough in the next week. Another thing Matt says, I would also think concerns over the state budget have the chance to be more politically damaging. Is this something you'd agree with? Here's a reality, not widely consumed by Joe voter. There's a lot of warning signs that the state budget, the projections are not working out, and there appears to be a quickly deteriorating situation there. I hope that doesn't happen. That would be painful, but we have to be honest. If this trend were to continue, next year's governor and legislature is poised to face some very uncomfortable decisions, probably some of the most uncomfortable budgeting decisions since the waning days of the Great Recession, which have long-term political and policy implications. I don't know that that's gonna hit soon enough for Joe voter to feel it. But I do think when we look to 2025, and some of you on this call are definitely going to be part of that process. I can see it already. Hopefully, a lot of you. There's going to be a real challenge. I think there's going to be a huge challenge with tremendous political consequences. I just don't think they will be happening before November 5th of this year. It's about 8:15. I'll maybe another question or comment, and then we'll kind of close it up. See if we got any other last questions or comments. It's okay if we don't. I don't see anything. So,
So
maybe.
I
think I may
I
have
just
heard
want to express like something that's made me sort of come around to like a thought of a possible income tax and made me start thinking like, oh, maybe this is the right way to go. I was in manufacturing for a long time, so I didn't like the idea of an income tax, but I think I saw something saying about like how older people are moving here, and I feel like a lot of reasons why they're choosing New Hampshire over Vermont is just for a tax break. Like when I want people thinking about moving into like an area, I want there to be some kind of incentive to like join the community. Like maybe they have families or like the beauty or job creations or education. These are reasons why people should desire to move to an area, not just for a tax break. And just sitting on this for a little while is sort of how I come around to like at least matching some of the taxes of Vermont. I don't know if I'm alone in that thought process or not.
Well, I could speak at least for tonight on the political reality of that, and this is probably where I've been around the block a couple times. Again, not as much as some of you on the call. It is an unusual place that we're at as a state, and it's not complete yet. But it seems entirely possible that the two parties are coming to a weird consensus, and it's this: compared to a generation ago, New Hampshire Democrats have reached the place of opposition to a new broad-based tax, an income tax, a general sales tax, and so forth, in a way that if you go back 25 or 30 years, I think there was a lot more. And by the way, even among some Republicans that were Liz Hager, a well-respected Republican in leadership in the House, was a Republican who actually was advocating. I mean, it was a very different time. And I think that there is a consensus that for all of the pros and cons of our current tax regime, that we are, at least at this point, we're working within that we're coloring within those lines. The funny thing is, it appears that the Republicans, including a lot of people who have been self-described pro-lifers, who have supported relatively rigid early restrictions on abortion rights. You watch what the Republicans in the House a couple weeks ago, they put out their sort of agenda for 2025 kind of thing. You know, their platform. If you elect us, this is what you'll get. And they're using language that a decade ago was unimaginable to me, about how we need to protect the current law on abortion, with the intonation being, you know, we got to protect that first 2 trimesters. And I look at some of the people that are there, and they realize how politically just incredibly painful their position on reproductive rights has been for the party at the state level and nationally. And so it's oddly, we may be entering a place in the years to come where public opposition to things like a broad-based income or sales tax have been so clear for so long that that is pretty much off the table. But also the public's support for broad and fairly expansive reproductive rights is also so strong and overwhelming that even most Republicans are slowly coming around to the belief that they may not have a choice but to take that issue off the table, because otherwise it just gets them nowhere politically. And I'm very interested as a political junkie to see in the years to come if where we end up as a state on abortion rights ends up to being kind of similar to where we've ended up on an income or sales tax, which is to say it's pretty much verboten on either side of the aisle at this point because of such strong political communication by the voter, the electorate on the issue. And so it's sort of off the table. And also the state has structured itself in such a way that it would be politically it would be impossible at this moment, and also would have a lot of unusual consequences as well. So you can see it's been a non-issue in this election, and frankly has been for a long time at the gubernatorial level. It would be my hope, I suppose, that reproductive rights reach that place in the relatively near future, as even a lot of Republicans begrudgingly acknowledge how broadly supported broad reproductive rights are in New Hampshire. So we'll see. All right. With that, unless I feel like I'm running an old mayoral meeting, a city council meeting, I will swing the gavel in a moment. I appreciate everybody being here. I will put this on YouTube shortly before I go to bed tonight. Please go on the YouTube channel. Feel free to like it and to share it. Also subscribe if you don't mind. If you haven't already, I will just as a last element here so that you have it. Let's see if I've got this here. Yeah, there we go. The YouTube channel is at Steve Marchand NH. Please go on my website, movethegoalpostnh.com, trying to keep that as updated as frequently as possible. I'm doing a lot of events still, and I'll be in Merrimack, the town of Merrimack, one of the most important swing districts in the state. Saturday morning at 9 a.m. I mentioned that in the email that probably most of you got today. We're going to try to raise some money, raise awareness, and win some extra seats in the town of Merrimack. I think that we can. I think we could win up to 5 seats there. And these are the kind of districts that we got to do well in order to secure the majority and actually have a little elbow room too. So that's a little pitch there. I'll have more events that I'll be announcing shortly via email and on the website. And of course, you can reach out to me anytime. You can email through the website. And I will try to be supportive. I'm helping with some mail pieces in some swing districts, trying to help with some finances. I know some of my friends on this call from Stratford County. Please get a hold of me offline. And I know we got some critical races there, and I want to help there as well, and am in a position to do some of that. This is go time. We're less than 3 weeks. You guys are awesome. And I think we can do awfully well on election day if we row in the same direction. Walter, maybe I'll close on this as the Stratford County Chair, since I just mentioned it. I saw your hand is up before we get going. Oh,
Just my congratulations on a very good presentation. We really
that's very
it.
kind. Thank you guys for sticking with it. I'm amazed at how patient people are in these things. And we'll do some more of this soon. And let me know how I can help. I'm hitting the road. I'm ready to help you guys out. Thank you for all you're doing.
Steve, after the bagels on Saturday morning, push those people out onto doors for us, will you? Go tell them to go knock doors.
I believe that is actually the goal. Yes,
Great.
I believe that is part of the goal. And because amen to that, hit the doors. That's how we turn swing voters into supporters.
We're planning on doing that, Katie.
Awesome.
Hey, there we go. Yeah, we've got Merrimack represented quite well on this call, actually.
We're here.
There you go. See Heather, see Jen. This is great. All right. We'll see you all on the trail soon. Thanks again.
Cora.